The wind chime hanging outside the shop jingled softly in the cold breeze, but no one turned to look. A man stood motionless at the entrance, his coat torn at the shoulders, his shoes caked in mud, and his hands clutching a faded canvas bag as if everything he had left in life was inside it. He wasn't begging. He wasn't pleading for pity. He simply asked, "Is there any work I can do? I just need a hot meal." Inside, a young woman was wiping down the counter. Her hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her hands moved quickly, but her eyes still paused at the sight of the stranger. She didn't know who he was, but she knew the look of someone who had slept under the cold sky, of someone who had once wondered if there'd be any reason to wake up the next morning. In less than 3 minutes, she handed him a bowl of hot soup, a soft piece of bread, and a steaming cup of coffee. "Let's just say today's your lucky day," she smiled, her voice as gentle as early morning mist. He looked up, eyes red and damp. "You just gave me dignity." But it was that very act, something as seemingly small as the warmth of a fireplace, that cost her the job. Right there, in front of customers and co-workers, beneath the harsh scolding of her supervisor and the heavy, uncomfortable silence that filled the entire room. No one spoke up for her. Not a single hand reached out to stop her. And so she walked away, not because she failed at her job, but because she dared to choose compassion. What she didn't know was that the man she helped that day was no ordinary stranger. He remembered her kindness not just in his heart, but in the pages of a notebook he carried, alongside a secret, and a power strong enough to change everything. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? If the answer is yes, then this story is for you. A journey that doesn't just restore justice, but reignites a forgotten little community where kindness once came with a cost. And it all began with a bowl of hot soup. The sun had just peeked over the snow-draped hills of suburban Montana when the lights inside the Rustwood truck stop flickered on, not because of a timer or some automatic switch, but because of the familiar hand of Cassie Bell, the one who always arrived earlier than anyone else. She stepped inside, her shoes creaking against the cold floor. Cassie's breath was still visible in the dim morning light, a thin mist curling into the lingering scents of old frying oil and last night's coffee. But instead of frowning, she smiled. There was something peaceful about this place, a rest stop for the far from home, for the ones still searching for where they belong, or maybe just needing someone to look at them with warmth in their eyes. Cassie didn't hold a fancy title. She didn't wear a polished uniform. She was just a 27-year-old woman, raised in a military family, living modestly, working hard. But at Rustwood, she was the first to say good morning, the one who knew who liked their coffee black and bitter, who always left a tip in the glass jar beside the register. Her father, a war veteran who had served overseas, always told her, "You don't need much to do what's right, just a little more courage than other people's indifference." After he passed away, Cassie kept his old folding knife in her pocket like a personal talisman. She didn't talk about it, but every time her fingers brushed the worn metal casing, she remembered why she was here, not just to serve coffee, but to be human. In the kitchen, old Ben, the diner's seasoned cook, was gently cracking eggs over the skillet. 40 years behind the stove had left his hands rough but steady. He and Cassie worked with little need for words. A glance, a nod, that was all it took. It was the kind of rhythm built not by orders, but by quiet respect. But ever since Tammy Crane, the new regional manager, showed up, that warm, lived-in harmony had begun to feel stifling. Tammy didn't like employees acting too friendly. She took down the community bulletin board, cut everyone's hours, and always strutted in on stilettos as if the diner floor were a red carpet. Each morning, she entered like a storm, clipboard in hand, eyes like searchlights, and one unshakable belief: employees weren't people. They were tools. Cassie had tried to speak up, once, and in return, she got a glare sharp enough to draw blood. You were hired to punch numbers, not play Mother Teresa. Still, Cassie kept smiling, still poured 2 sugars into the coffee of the old trucker who couldn't hold a spoon anymore, still checked in on Pete, the regular whose limp hadn't fully healed, not because she wanted attention, but because she believed out there on endless highways, in the middle of cold, forgotten journeys, someone needed to be reminded they were alive, not just getting by. And that very belief led her to a crossroads no one could have predicted on a snowy morning when the sky was blanketed in white, and the wind chime above the door rang out, announcing the arrival of a stranger. The soft jingle of the bell was so familiar to Cassie, she almost didn't register it. She was bent over the fridge, reorganizing cartons of half and half, when the old wooden door groaned open and a gust of cold swept in, carrying the scent of slush, motor oil, and something else, something different. When she looked up, the man standing in the doorway seemed caught between choices: step inside or turn away. He wore a faded army jacket, its hem fraying at the edges. His hands clutched a weathered canvas bag to his chest. A thin grey stubble covered his cheeks. His skin was wind-burnt, and his eyes deep, sunken, didn't speak of exhaustion from sleepless nights, but of a long drought of trust. As he took slow, careful steps inside, small puddles formed on the rubber floor beneath him, as if the snow and cold of a long, frozen life were finally starting to melt. Cassie knew that kind of weariness, not of the body, but of the soul. Her father had once worn that same look, whenever war memories dragged him from sleep in the middle of the night. She didn't ask who the man was, didn't judge, didn't brace herself. She simply smiled, a real smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "You look like you could use something warm." The man nodded slowly. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken to another soul in days. "I'm not asking for money, just wondering, is there any work I could do? Shoveling snow, washing dishes, anything. I just need a meal." Cassie said nothing at first, not because she was uncertain, but because something clenched tight in her chest. The diner was quiet. Tammy hadn't arrived yet. Cassie glanced at the clock. 1 more hour. Just one. "We're not really hiring," she began, then paused. "But I can get you a bowl of soup and coffee. Put it on a tab. All right. You can pay it back when things get better." The man opened his mouth, about to decline, but Cassie had already turned toward the kitchen. She ladled the leftover beef stew from the night before into a ceramic bowl, added a piece of soft bread, and poured fresh coffee into a clean white mug. "You can sit anywhere you like," she said, gently sliding the tray toward him. "Take your time. It's warmer in here than out there." He stood still for a moment, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then he stepped forward slowly and sat by the window, his hands trembling as he lifted the mug. Just a small sip, but already. His eyes began to glisten. He looked up at her, voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't just give me food, you gave me dignity." Cassie paused, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she knew she was witnessing something that words couldn't quite hold. A moment when a person is finally seen after being invisible to the world for far too long. To her, he wasn't a drifter. He was simply a man, cold, hungry, and still clinging to the quiet hope that somewhere, someone might still choose kindness. And on that snow-covered morning, Cassie chose to be that someone. What she didn't know was that just minutes later, that same kindness would be labeled a mistake, and what happened next would cost her the very job she loved. The sharp clack of heels striking cold tile shattered the warm silence in the corner of the diner. Click, 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 like a hammer cracking glass. Tammy Crane had arrived. She didn't walk in, she stormed in, like a thunderstorm with a schedule. Fitted blazer, hair pulled into a flawless bun, and a clipboard wielded like a sword. No greetings, no glancing around. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, went straight to the corner of the room. "Hey, why is that man eating without a receipt?" The air in the diner froze, as if someone had opened a walk-in freezer. Cassie turned from the register just a beat slower than usual, but still calm. "He only asked if we had any work, ma'am." Cassie explained gently. "I couldn't hire him, but I gave him a meal. It was leftovers from yesterday," on whose authority Tammy hissed. "This is a business, not a soup kitchen." Cassie nodded toward the man's tattered army coat. "He's a veteran. A bowl of soup and a cup of coffee won't bankrupt the company, but it might keep someone from falling apart." Tammy cut her off, her voice rising with each word loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "I don't care if he's a veteran or the Pope. No receipt means lost revenue, and you violated company policy. You had no right to make that call." The man stood slowly. His face had gone pale. Quietly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, ma'am. I'll just go." Tammy glanced at the money and sneered. "Put it away. We don't take guilt money from the homeless." The air turned thick, choking. Truckers stopped mid-bite. Ben, the old cook, tightened his grip on a spoon. A young server lowered her gaze, afraid to look up. Cassie stepped forward, placing herself between Tammy and the man. "That's enough," she said. Her voice wasn't soft anymore. "He didn't ask for anything. I chose to help. I'll take responsibility." Tammy crossed her arms, eyes blazing. "So you admit it? You broke the rules? That's theft." Cassie blinked. "Theft for a bowl of soup. And that's why I'm firing you, right now." Tammy extended her hand. "Name tag, apron. Hand them over." No one said a word. Even the sound of oil sizzling on the stove seemed to stop, as if the world itself held its breath. Cassie unpinned her name tag. She untied her apron. Her hands trembled, but her back remained straight. She turned, picked up her purse and coat. The man followed quietly behind. When the door closed behind them, the cold that rushed in wasn't just snow and wind, it was the chill of a place that had once been warm, losing the soul that had made it so. Cassie didn't cry, but her eyes, as she stepped outside, told the whole story. Disappointment, hurt, but no regret, because she knew if given the choice again, she'd still serve that bowl of soup. The wind lashed at her face like knives of ice. Snow covered the parking lot, her footsteps pressing deep, only to be erased seconds later by swirling gusts. Cassie walked without direction, only knowing she had to leave the place she once called her second home. She didn't look back, didn't turn around. But from behind, the door opened again. "Ma'am," a man's voice, still hoarse, but not from hunger this time, from something else. Cassie stopped, turned slowly. The man caught up, his duffel bag slung loosely over his shoulder, his eyes squinting against the blowing snow, but in his hand he held something small, weathered, and heartbreakingly familiar. "You dropped this," he said. Cassie looked down at what he was holding, an old folding knife, its steel worn thin, with the initials J.R.R.B. engraved along the side. Her mouth parted in shock. "Oh my God, that's your father's." "Right." Cassie clutched the knife, as if letting go of it would let go of her past entirely. She nodded, her voice catching. "He was a soldier. He passed. When I was still in high school, I've always carried it, to remind myself why kindness matters." The man looked at her, his gaze deeper than the storm around them. "You're one of the rare ones, someone who could look a man like me in the eye without judgment." Cassie gave a tired smile. "I just did what I thought was right. Maybe the world's forgotten what that means. Not everyone has," he said. Then slowly, he pulled a weathered black notebook from his coat pocket. It was the first moment Cassie felt something shift, a subtle crack in the story, a sense that this man was not who she thought he was. The pen he pulled out wasn't something you'd find lying on the street. It was sleek, refined, the kind used by someone who'd spent years in a professional environment. He scribbled something, quick, precise. "What's the manager's name?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the page. "Tammy Crane." "But why?" Cassie replied, confused. He closed the notebook, slid the pen back into his coat. "I just have a habit of recording what's wrong. Who deserves respect and who needs a reminder?" Cassie narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" He offered a faint smile, not apologetic, but the kind of smile someone wears when they're quietly taking notes. "Just a man who still believes the way we treat strangers says everything about us." Then he turned, slowly, steadily, no longer dragging his feet, but walking with purpose. Cassie stood there, the old knife clutched in her hand, her chest rising with a feeling she couldn't quite name. Not fear, Not anger, but instinct, that what had just happened wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Less than an hour after Cassie left, the bell above the door at Rustwood truck stop jingled once more. Ben looked up from his skillet. Maggie froze mid-wipe at the counter. Truckers scattered across the diner all lifted their heads at the same time. The man from earlier, the one who had entered timidly, almost trembling, was back. But now he no longer shuffled. He no longer stared at the floor. He walked in like he belonged there. His coat was still old, his shoes still wet with snow, but everything else had changed. His shoulders were squared, his stride was firm, and his eyes clear, focused. The wandering soul had vanished. He walked straight to the counter, slowly, deliberately, until he stood face to face with Tammy Crane. "Ms. Crane," he said calmly, his tone as neutral as someone reading the weather. Tammy, scribbling something on an inspection sheet, looked up, startled, then quickly shifted to her usual tone of irritation. "I told you you're not allowed back in here." The man didn't flinch. He pulled out the same black notebook Cassie had seen earlier, opened it, pen already in hand. "I just have a few questions. This won't take long." Tammy scowled. "Who are you, police health inspector? If you don't have a warrant, I'm calling security." "How long have you been managing this location?" he asked, unfazed. Tammy's eyes widened. "That's none of your business. Is the authority to terminate employees yours alone, or does it require higher-level approval?" "This is internal company policy," she snapped, starting to lose composure. "You're way out of line. Who do you think you are? You got some badge hidden under that coat or something?" The man looked up and met her eyes, steady and unwavering. "I don't need a badge," he said, voice even and calm. "I work directly with the person who signs your paycheck." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The sizzling from the kitchen stopped. Ben stood frozen, the spatula slipping from his hand with a soft metallic clink. Maggie set down a coffee cup, unable to muffle the pounding of her own heart. Tammy went rigid. "You're joking," she said stiffly. "Is that what you think?" The man smiled for the first time, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that sliced through the air. "Because I've heard that the word leadership around here has been twisted into threats, into humiliation, into the power to fire someone over a bowl of soup." "This is ridiculous," Tammy snapped, her voice rising in desperation. "I don't have to answer to you." The man calmly folded his notebook, slid his pen away. "You're right, but you will answer to the person I'm about to meet." He turned without another word. The door opened again, the bell this time ringing like a war drum, and he vanished into the snow. Silence fell over the diner like fresh frost. No one spoke, but everyone was thinking the same thing. That man was not just anyone, and this story was far from over. Not even 20 minutes had passed when another sound broke the stillness, but this time it wasn't the bell. It was the low, powerful hum of a diesel engine outside in the snow-covered lot. Through the fogged glass, warmed by the diner's breath, everyone inside turned to look. A deep blue pickup rolled in like a predator, smooth, strong, and hauntingly familiar. The door opened. A tall man, likely in his 70s, stepped out. He wore a worn cowboy hat, a long grey wool coat, and a presence carved from stone and steel. His eyes were blades, his silence heavier than snow. He didn't need to move fast. Everyone had already recognized him. Harlan Stone, founder of the Rustwood truck stop chain, Vietnam War veteran, a legend. He hadn't set foot in this location in over 2 years. And now he was here, in person. No announcement, no entourage. He entered as though the entire diner was simply an extension of his will, and trailing behind him was silence. Tammy shot up from behind the counter, a frozen smile plastered across her face like glazed porcelain. "Mr. Stone, what an honor. We had no idea you'd be stopping by today." Harlan didn't answer. He looked straight ahead, not at Tammy, but toward the empty space in the middle of the room. Then he asked, "Where's Cassie Bell?" Tammy froze, just half a beat. Then she clutched her clipboard like it was a shield. Her voice turned mechanical. "She was terminated earlier this morning, by me, due to a serious policy violation. She served a free meal to a stranger without proper authorization." Harlan nodded, just once, barely perceptible. "Policy. Huh." He turned toward Ben, the old cook, and Maggie, the barista, both standing behind the counter. Breath held. "Is that true?" Ben Harlan's voice was calm, but the weight behind it made the air vibrate. Ben's lips pressed into a line. He stammered, unable to form words. It was Maggie, usually the quietest soul in the diner, who spoke first. He was a veteran. Looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Cassie didn't take money, but she wasn't begged either. She just saw someone who needed help. Harlan nodded slowly. Then he pulled a phone from his coat pocket, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward Tammy. "Let me tell you something about that man." On the screen was a single message. "You were right, Harlan. She fired Cassie, called me a leech. I wrote it all down. Gus." Tammy's face drained of color. Her eyes darted. "Gus. Gus." Riley Harlan's voice dropped to granite. "My best friend for 40 years. And the man you threw out of this diner this morning." He turned back to the counter. With deliberate calm, he laid down a thick folder on the wooden surface. "I didn't come here for a bowl of soup. I came because of what I've been hearing for months." Tammy took a step back. Reports from staff. Skyrocketing turnover. Customer complaints. Toxic work environment. "You think I didn't know?" Harlan began flipping through the folder. Internal emails, resignation letters, cut time cards, photos of altered payroll records, written statements from employees threatened with termination for calling in sick, even with a doctor's note. No one spoke. Even breathing seemed to pause. Tammy tried to rally. "Sir, I boosted profits by 18% this last quarter. I cut costs. I improved service times." Harlan looked up. "Profit does not excuse cruelty." His voice was low, but it thundered in the hearts of everyone present. You humiliated a veteran. You shamed your own staff in front of customers. And then you lied to me. He turned toward the entrance and made a small gesture. A second man walked in. Long coat, police badge on his belt. "This is Officer Dale. He'll escort you while you gather your things, turn in your keys, and leave the premises." Tammy couldn't form a word. The people who had once been her subordinates now turned away. No one looked at her. The back door closed behind Officer Dale. The noise evaporated. And in that silence, for the first time in months, Rustwood felt like a place for people again. Tammy stood frozen, her eyes locked on Officer Dale, who approached with the quiet professionalism of someone far too used to saying goodbye to the unwelcome. "You can't do this," she finally choked out, still clinging to whatever authority she thought she had. "I'm the regional manager. I have performance records. I improved your bottom line." Harlan raised a hand. "Tammy," he said, not loud, but in a tone no one dared interrupt. "I've lived by spreadsheets for 3 decades. I understand numbers better than most. But one thing I've learned." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "People don't belong in the profit column." Tammy opened her mouth to argue, but Harlan continued, his voice unwavering, each word cutting clean and sharp. "You turned a place that was once a peaceful stop for the far from home into a cold checkpoint. You fired the kindest soul in this building simply because she knew how to do the right thing." Then he turned to the employees. "How many of you were threatened, had your hours cut, saw your pay docked? How many had to take time off because you were pushed past your limits?" Maggie raised her hand first, then Ben, then the young part-time student, and finally 2 more workers stepped out from the kitchen. They didn't speak, but their eyes said everything. Tammy stumbled back, her face pale as snow. "I didn't mean harm. I was just following protocol, and I'm following mine," Harlan said coldly. "This system, this company isn't meant for people who use protocol as an excuse to forget humanity." He gave a nod to Officer Dale. "Execute immediate termination, retrieve her badge, keys, and any company property. Effective now." Tammy gasped, desperation rising in her voice. You're really firing me?" "No," Harlan replied, eyes steady and unblinking. "You fired yourself." Every eye in the diner followed as Tammy turned and walked toward the back office. There were no more clacking heels on the tile. Only the long, collective exhale of the staff, not of regret, but of release. The back door shut again, but this time no chill followed. Instead, something lighter entered, something warmer, like someone had finally pulled back the heavy curtain that had kept this place in shadow for far too long. Harlan stood in the center of the diner, not as a CEO, but as a father figure reclaiming a home that had been neglected. And all he said, as softly as breath, was, "This company doesn't exist for money. It exists for people." Out in the far corner of the parking lot, Cassie still sat in her car, hands on the steering wheel, but the engine off. She had been ready to leave this town, this chapter of her life, if she had to, But then her phone buzzed. One message from Ben. "Come back. Now. Trust me." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Part of her hesitated, afraid the morning's wounds would only be reopened. But her feet moved before her mind could stop them. When Cassie pushed open the front door of Rustwood again, something strange happened instead of silence. Every single person inside, from staff to customers, turned to look at her. And they smiled. There was no pity in their eyes, no sadness, only the look of people who had been waiting for something right to return. And then, from the center of the crowd, a man stepped forward, tall, commanding, yet carrying the posture of someone who'd known storms and battlegrounds. Harlan Stone. Cassie froze. She recognized him from the faded photo that once hung in the main office, the founder of Rustwood. The man who had never stepped foot in this branch since the day she started working. And now he stood before her, extending his hand, eyes lit with the kind of steadiness Cassie had only ever seen in her father. "Cassie Bell," he said, his voice low, but firm enough for the whole room to hear, "I owe you an apology. And something more." Cassie couldn't speak. Her hand instinctively tightened around the old folding knife in her coat pocket, her father's knife. Her breath caught in her throat. Harlan gently guided her toward the center of the diner, where the others had gathered around the counter. Then he turned to face them all. "She did exactly what I've always hoped my employees would do, not follow the handbook, but follow what's right, not obey blindly, but act like a human being. And because of that, I'd like to make this official." He turned to Cassie, meeting her eyes. "I'd like to offer you the position of lead shift supervisor at Rustwood, Montana, with the authority to respond flexibly in matters of compassion and to lead our new service culture training initiative." Gasps, whispers, then silence. Cassie still hadn't spoken. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. And then, as if the universe wanted to seal the moment, another man stepped out from the far end of the counter. Gus Riley. Gone was the rumpled coat. Gone was the shaggy beard and faded duffel. Now he stood straight, simple shirt, neat appearance, with the warm gaze of a familiar uncle. "You don't know who I am," Gus said gently. "And that's exactly why you're special." He held out a small object, a faded piece of cloth, bearing a worn military insignia. Its colors had dulled, but its shape remained strong. "It belonged to my brother," Gus whispered. "He used to say, 'One kind act, at the right time, could keep a soldier from falling apart.' Today, you did that. No rank, no title, just heart." Cassie took the cloth, tears brimming in her eyes. Harlan smiled softly and said, "Cassie, you did the right thing even when it cost you." Harlan said, his voice firm yet warm, "That's not the act of an employee. That's the character of a leader." Cassie nodded, voice trembling, eyes shining. "Yes, sir. If you still need someone like that, then I'm ready." And in that moment, as scattered applause began to rise around the room, growing louder, stronger, more heartfelt, Cassie understood. She wasn't just being welcomed back. She was being seen, acknowledged, and for the first time, placed exactly where she had always belonged. As the last clap echoed into stillness, no one said a word. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone was waiting. And the next to step forward was Gus Riley, no longer the weathered man in a frayed army coat. Now a dignified gentleman, composed, calm, yet still bearing the quiet edge of someone who had lived between two worlds, one of glory and one of forgotten pain. Gus held a coffee cup in one hand, nodded politely to the room, then looked at Cassie, who was still clutching the worn military patch like a lifeline to her late father. "You know," Gus began, his voice low but steady, "I visited dozens of Rustwood locations over the past 2 years as Harlan's closest friend, and sometimes as a test." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Some of the staff began recognizing him, the quiet drifter, the trucker, the stranger who never said much. "We have our own way of checking on the culture we claim to stand for," Gus continued, "not through surveys, but through truth. Truth that only comes out when no one thinks they're being watched." He turned to Cassie. "That day, I didn't need soup. I can take care of myself. But I did need to know if anyone here still had the courage to do what's right, even if it meant risking their position, their safety, or their reputation. And you," he said, eyes brimming with quiet emotion, "didn't hesitate." Cassie stood speechless. She didn't know how to respond. All she could feel was the raw, beautiful strangeness of being seen not for a mistake, but for the light she didn't even know she carried. "You didn't know who I was," Gus said, "and that's what made your kindness more genuine than anything. You didn't help to earn points. You didn't act out of obligation. You helped because you believed someone needed help." From his pocket, he pulled a business card, not a corporate one, but something simpler. It read, "Gus Riley, veteran, founder of One Warm Meal Foundation for Homeless Vets." Since that day, Rustwood has committed to something new, Gus said. "For every new hire, we now give priority to unhoused veterans like I once was." The diner fell silent again. Ben wiped his eyes behind foggy glasses. Maggie rested a hand gently on Cassie's shoulder. "And the most important thing," Gus said, stepping forward, placing a hand over his heart, "is that we now know the culture Harlan built isn't dead." He looked at Cassie once more. "You are not ordinary. You are the heartbeat of a value many believed was lost. Leadership," he said, "isn't a title. It's a daily choice in how we treat those who have nothing to offer us." Cassie nodded through tears, unable to stop them. She had never imagined being recognized like this. Harlan stepped beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "We've tested many, but you didn't just pass. You made us want to rebuild the entire system around you." And in just a few short weeks after that morning, Rustwood Truck Stop began to transform, not through new signs, not through loud marketing, but through the simplest thing of all, the way people looked at each other. Cassie, now wearing a name tag that read Shift Supervisor with a shy smile, as if it still didn't quite belong to her, began each shift not by counting inventory, but by asking every team member, "Did you sleep okay last night? Is today's schedule working for you?" There were no barking orders, no raised voices, no fear of saying the wrong thing and ending up in someone's report. The community board, once torn down by Tammy, was back up on the wall. Now it overflowed with handwritten notes, thank you letters from long-haul truckers, announcements about free church dinners, a flyer for a missing cat, even a napkin with a short poem from a passing traveler. But the thing that moved everyone most was a small blackboard to the right of the register. In white chalk, it read, "Pay it forward wall, kindness in advance." Beneath it, thin white tally marks, each one representing a meal or coffee already paid for, waiting for someone in need. No questions asked, no forms, just one tired look was enough to be invited in. Truckers started coming back to Rustwood more often. Some even drove an extra 30 minutes just to stop by, because this was the only place where people still remembered your name. A young mother, traveling cross-country for the first time with her child, quietly left a note on a napkin. "I don't have much, but today I had breakfast and a smile." That's enough for now. Cassie pinned that napkin to the board. It became the start of the Gratitude Corner, a place where anyone could leave a small note, a thank you, a blessing, or just a whisper that said, "I was here, and I was seen." Ben still flipped the eggs. Maggie still poured the coffee, but something had changed. They walked lighter, laughed easier. No one flinched at the sound of Tammy's name anymore, and Gus, the man once mistaken for a drifter, now visited the diner every week. No one looked at him with pity now. They knew he was part of the quiet miracle that had taken place. Gus didn't talk much. He watched. Sometimes he'd sit in the back booth, nodding at Cassie just like her father used to, a simple gesture that meant, "Keep going, you're doing fine." Rustwood never became perfect. There were still short-staffed days, still coffee machine breakdowns, still the occasional rude customer. But the difference was, no one felt like a tool anymore. Cassie didn't lead by her title. She led by the way her eyes noticed exhaustion in someone else's. One chilly afternoon, as snow dusted the roof once again, Cassie saw a young boy step inside, clothes dirty, hands shaking. She didn't ask why. She just poured a hot cocoa, set it on the table, and smiled. "Cold out there, huh? Sit down for a bit. First cup's on Rustwood." From the corner booth, Gus nodded again, and Cassie understood she didn't have to become anything else, because who she was, that small act of kindness, on that snowy morning had started a quiet wave that changed everything. Some change is loud, filled with posters, press releases, and applause. But some change is silent, born from an understanding glance, a hand extended without reason, and a hot bowl of soup on a cold winter morning. Rustwood Truck Stop didn't become a model company overnight, but it became a place worth stopping for, not for the eggs or the bold coffee, but because, here, you were never invisible. Cassie didn't have to climb any ladder to feel worthy. She just had to be herself, kind, honest, and unwilling to stay quiet when something was wrong. One evening, when the place had emptied out, Ben shut down the kitchen early because of heavy snow. Cassie wiped down the counter under the soft glow of the lights, gazing at the Pay It Forward board, now marked with over 300 white lines. Over 300 meals paid forward for someone not yet through the door. She ran her fingers across the handwritten notes, simple scraps of paper that carried entire lifetimes. Thank you for not asking why I was wearing a t-shirt in the dead of winter. My mum passed away that day, and you smiled at me. Thank you. I used to sleep in my car. Now I have a job started with that coffee. Cassie looked up. Snow danced outside, but inside it felt warmer than any spring morning. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her father's old folding knife, and placed it gently on the counter for a moment. Her fingers traced the faded engraving J.R.R.B., as if to say, "You were right, Dad. Kindness is never wrong." Gus sat in his usual spot, his gaze calm, knowing. He nodded at her like always. Cassie thought to herself, "You were right, too. Even if I lost everything, I didn't lose myself." At the window-side table, a new customer took a seat, thin jacket, trembling hands. Cassie didn't ask why. She simply poured a fresh cup of coffee, set it down gently, and smiled. Welcome to Rustwood. Here, people see each other. A bowl of soup. A gesture. One person brave enough to do the right thing when no one made them do it. And from that, an entire community was reborn. If today you find yourself choosing between policy and compassion, remember this: being seen once can save an entire life.